Did you even hear the word poker mentioned at all? One of the things that I'm just curious about, with understanding how difficult it's going to be to get iGaming approved in a lot of these states, or at least the long road, it does seem poker's a little bit more palatable for whatever reason for people. And I wonder why we haven't seen that avenue broached. And I understand there's not a big revenue generator, but I almost think the conversation then, if you get poker done, is kind of like, guys, we've got poker, we got sports betting. What the hell are we doing? Why don't we have, what is the big deal about iGaming? It almost seems like at that point where you just go like, come on, people, what are we doing here? We've got these other things. Why don't we do this? It makes more sense that way. So I was just curious if you even heard anything about poker at all.
Most of the discussion about poker that I heard, and it was minimal discussion in the first place, was in the past tense and talking about what got us here versus where do we go in the future. Very little discussion of poker. Now, I don't know if that is just lingering scars for people and not wanting to even open the discussion again of the legality of online poker. Again, those are things that I think are discussions to be had in the future. But when we look at what happens right now, I'm not sure it's seen as that different of a lift than iGaming. Right? I'm not sure that anybody looks at it as anything more than another game to be able to try to get legalized in various places. And, that is something where I'm sure there are a lot of educational hurdles that have to be overcome, right? What if I were to ask you right now what you think most people remember about online poker in the U.S., what would you say?
Well, I mean, probably just Black Friday getting shut down,
right.
and all that, all the websites getting shut down. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I think that's really where most people remembers, and I think that's where you start in terms of educating anybody who, and think about the fact that how long ago was that? How many state legislators have turned over since that time? Are you starting from a brand new place in educating people with poker? And as you said, it's not going to be as big of a revenue driver just because of the structure of the game.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I wonder there has to have been enough research done to where they just don't think that the crossover is enough to really push for anything like that. And plus, just it's a liquidity issue, right? I mean, if you have to be state by state, and I know there's compacts and things like that, but still, if you don't have 20 states going at it, Adam, because you really need the thousands of players playing at a time, not the hundreds of players playing at a time. If you don't have 20 kind of states going at it to where you have games and tournaments going at all hours of the day and you have kind of a robust ecosystem going on in there, it's just not really going to work. I mean, listen, I live here in Nevada. We have it. The only time it's really ever super, super bustling is when the World Series of Poker is going on out here because there's so many people in town that are poker players. And so that's really the only time you have games going at all hours of the day, with stuff like that and everything. And so it's, until we can get to a point where there's that, I probably won't even be part of the conversation. And hell, as you mentioned, I mean, if we always knew that I was on the prize of casino as it was anyway. If you go get casino, do you even care if you have poker? You probably don't even care.
No, you probably don't care at all, Matt. And to the discussion of the liquidity, how different really is it than the discussion we have around exchanges? Right, because you're still talking about,
it's almost exactly the same. You rely on, I rely on you, who relies on someone else, who relies on someone else, who relies on someone else to make it worthwhile.
Right, it's the same discussion of we're talking about something where it's a matter of a per transaction fee that ultimately comes off the top to create the ability for this company to stay alive. And what did we just see in New Jersey? We see that Profit Exchange, one of the two exchanges operating along with Sporttrade in New Jersey, has stopped taking wagers. Right? They say that they might open again at some point, but again, we come back to the same place that we were, I think, at the beginning of this discussion about why haven't exchanges really taken off, and it's the same thing you just mentioned. There just is not the liquidity to make it happen.
Was there any scuttlebutt of any of the stories that we've gone over, over the last 6 months here on any of this? Was there any of the, oh man, did you hear this? Or did you know about this? Or, or, hey, I heard this company's interested in maybe doing this, or this company might buy this, whatever, or something like that? Or is that something not really comfortable talking about here in a public forum, which is perfectly fine?
No, it's fine. I mean, you know, you have conversations of all shapes and sizes, and there are folks who, when they talk to you, begin the conversation by saying, "This is off the record," right?
Yeah.
And you understand exactly what you're doing when you have those conversations, and we will always be sensitive to that in terms of our sources. Not a lot of M&A based talk. We did recently see that. I believe it was Sharp Alpha Advisors had a $25 million funding round to invest in some companies. But again, what is $25 million really in the long run when we talk about M&A in this business? It's just not that much. When it comes to stories that we have talked about, I mean, I'll quickly go back to the idea of DFS Plus, Flex, et cetera, and say the talk is, of course, what happens in Texas and what happens in California.
Yeah.
And, that is something that everyone will talk about. I think there is, how would I put this, guarded optimism, and I think that's the highest level of positivity that is out there for either of those states. Guarded optimism at best, outright skepticism at worst, that Texas gets done, or that the California opinion, when it does come in from the AG, comes in a sort of favorable way for DFS as the industry that it looks like today. So that really raises a whole separate question that I'm sure we'll be talking about, is that if this Attorney General opinion comes down before the beginning of football season when it comes to the future of Prize Picks, Underdog, and the like in California, will that potentially spur M&A? Because that was discussion that was had at that capital markets forum, was to say, okay, whereas some of these companies you might not have wanted to touch 6 months ago, it has quieted down a little bit in the regulatory space for those companies at the moment. And so would there be an opportunity right now for them to be able to at least entertain a reasonable price from someone for an offer? But that being said, if California comes in favorably, well, that multiple goes up quite a bit now, doesn't it? If California doesn't come in favorably, then, if I'm an acquiring company, I'm going to start looking at total addressable market and say, well, you just lost the biggest population in the country after you already lost New York. So it's a lot to be discussed when it comes to that particular piece of the ecosystem. Beyond that, if I look at who was on the floor, Matt, at SBC, your usual mishmash of operators who are part of the gray market, right? Who are willing to operate in spaces that are unregulated throughout the world. A lot of folks in the payment processing space, which ultimately is an undercovered aspect of all of this. And I will give you a little bit of a hint into something we're working on a story on now at LSR, because I did talk to a couple of folks in this space.
I like it. Long tease. Yeah. Let's do it.
Little thinking.
There we go.
So as we talk about a little bit of the thinking that's out there, will there ever be a challenge to the geo-comply monopoly in the geolocation space? There are definitely some companies who are making noise in this area about wanting to be part of sports betting and iGaming in that space. So talk to some folks about that. I think it's an interesting concept to explore, to see, is that really a stranglehold on the market that can ever be affected? We know XPoint is out there, and we've talked about that company a bit. We've talked about some other companies as well, and I think that's something we'll be following over the next 6 to 12 months for sure.
Yeah, we don't talk a ton about poker here on the pod, mainly because it's kind of a dying breed, but it is interesting because we do talk a lot about Texas, and there is that weird carve out in Texas that allows for card rooms to operate because it is a membership that you pay to be a part of the club. And so then at that point, you're able to operate these card rooms. And by the way, they are huge businesses. I mean, because there is no traditional casino gambling in any of these states there, the main states in Texas, main cities in Texas, you sit there and you look and it's like, there's a huge card room in Austin, and there's huge ones in Houston and San Antonio and all this stuff that are packed all the time that run all of these. And it's like, I'm wondering how long we are until where if Texas can't get sports betting done or something like that, you pay a membership to be able to make sports bets or something, or something like that, where they challenge this law even more, Adam, because it's kind of like, look, we've gone through a couple cycles now with Texas. If we get through this one and can't get something done, it wouldn't surprise me to see people just go off the rails here.
I mean, we could have a whole separate pod just about card rooms and their effect on the overall ecosystem, right? We know that card rooms are at the center of the discussion in California, and the tribes battle with them. We know we had a major discussion up in Washington about card rooms and their place in the ecosystem. Minnesota, the lawsuit that is going on right now has to do with card games and whether or not they are illegal. So there's lots going on in terms of that, whether it's the discussion about that, like you said, about the carve-out, whether it's the California discussion of whether there are house-banked games. Because remember, you're the dealer in California.
Yeah.
And I put the wink in there not because I take a side in this, but when I've driven down a California freeway and one of the casinos has an ad on the board saying, "We're hiring dealers," it kind of takes a little bit out of the steam of that argument, doesn't it?
Oh, it's so funny. The only reason I bring that up, there's a couple of lawmakers who are in a lot of those card rooms are back in a thing where they're trying to get the wording changed to that law to like keep them from kind of operating in the air quote gray area right now. That's something we'll follow up on later down the line here as more clarity of that all comes down to. But just there are things going on still in the country. I know that we slowed down as far as state legalizations and things like that or whatever, but now we have, as we just mentioned, in New York, they're trying to change some things here and there. We still have Texas, still have California, still have other stuff that's going to come down the pike here, Adam. So there's still lots of stuff to talk about.
Yes, and you know what? I completely blanked on one thing that I talked to a number of people about that not only was a major topic of discussion among the panels and among people in the industry, but also I had it brought up to me in conversations, and I brought it up to people in conversations, is responsible gambling. And the one of the most interesting panels I thought in the entire SBC program was during the Player Protection Symposium on Tuesday. The heads of responsible gambling for DraftKings, MGM, and FanDuel were all present and having a collaborative conversation about not only some of the things that they're trying to do, some of the innovation they're trying to do in the space. Very interesting note from the head of responsible gambling for BetMGM saying that he has never had his accounts team push back a single time on a recommendation that they made from the responsible gambling side of saying, hey, you need to shut down this account. This is someone who has gone a little too far here, and we need to close down this account. So a lot of discussion, and naturally so, with all of the scandals that we've seen throughout the college and professional sports betting landscape, right? That's always going to naturally bleed over into SBC. I thought it was really interesting to see that this discussion, whether it's being forced into the spotlight or whether it was in the spotlight naturally, I don't really think it matters ultimately, right? It's just a matter of, are we having the conversations we need to have? Is there truly going to be some level of self-regulation attempted by the industry prior to it being done by somebody else? And I will say it was encouraging to hear about the things that were being done from those three operators in particular, the beginning of the coalition that these operators have put together. You know, there was definitely some pushback, to the idea that this was being done in response to Ohtani and Jonte Porter and so on. And one person said, you realize how long we've been working on this to try to put it together? And if so, sorry, because the timing doesn't look spectacular, but yes, we understand that a lot of coordination has gone into this. So that was a major topic of discussion throughout SBC.
Guys, head over to LegalSportsReport.com early and often next week as we get all the stories up on the site coming out of SBC. And of course, we will continue to monitor everything going on across the gambling landscape and get it up over there on LSR. For Adam, I am Matt. Talk to you guys next week.